Welcome to this conversation where we take the heavy lifting out of being well-informed. Today, we're setting aside the musical scales and really focusing on the sheer colossal scale of a 1960s cinematic institution.
Hmm.
We are talking about the 1965 film, The Sound of Music.
An absolute giant of a film.
Exactly. And our mission for you, the learner, is not to simply revisit the famous narrative. We're going to go far beyond the plot.
Right.
Our goal is to analyze the rich sources detailing the film's fascinating origins, its grueling production, its unprecedented commercial domination, the surprising historical reality of the Von Trapp family, and, the profound, sometimes contradictory cultural legacy it still has today.
It is absolutely crucial to establish the scale of this film right away. When we look at the history of cinema, The Sound of Music is just a permanent giant.
It really is.
It was released on March 10, 1965. And it didn't just perform well, it instantly redefined what a blockbuster could be.
And the awards followed.
They certainly did.
Yeah.
At the 38th Academy Awards, it was dominant. It secured 5 Oscars, including the highly coveted awards for Best Picture and Best Director for Robert Wise.
So its formal stature is utterly cemented. The U.S. Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry back in 2001, labeling it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
And it achieved that status because it became more than just a movie. It became a cultural touchstone.
And commercially, its success was revolutionary.
Well, consider this distinction. Within just 4 weeks of its limited initial release, it was already the #1 box office film in the United States.
4 weeks.
And here is the truly staggering data point. By November 1966, that's less than 2 years after its premiere, it officially surpassed the seemingly untouchable record held by Gone with the Wind.
Wow.
It became the highest-grossing film in history worldwide, and it held that record for 5 years. That speaks not just to popularity, but to a seismic cultural shift that was happening globally.
Yeah. That is just an astronomical height to reach, especially in the competitive environment of mid-1960s cinema. So let's explore how this story, which really started as a fairly modest memoir, ended up transforming into a property valued in the hundreds of millions.
It's a fascinating journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. The film we all know and adore, with its specific look and unforgettable songs, it has a somewhat convoluted and very profitable lineage.
It really does.
We have to start with the source material, which precedes all the glamour and the music.
The foundation is Maria von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. It was published in 1949, and the context of its creation is important.
It wasn't just for art's sake.
Not at all. She wrote it for a deeply practical reason, to promote her family's professional singing group. Her husband, Georg, had died in 1947, and the family really needed to maintain their income and their career in America. Marie was meticulous. She insisted her entire story be told, not just some simplified fragment.
And what's fascinating, this is a critical piece of the film's later reception, is that the first people to see the film potential weren't in Hollywood. They weren't even on Broadway. They were in West Germany.
That's absolutely correct. In 1956, a German producer named Wolfgang Liebeneiner acquired the initial film rights.
And he got them for what seems like a pittance now.
A ridiculously small amount. It really reflects the lower perceived value of intellectual property back then. He paid only $9,000.
$9,000.
Adjusted for inflation, that's about $104,000 today. Still a relative bargain for a story that would become the highest-grossing film of all time.
And that $9,000 investment, it yielded a huge return for the German market, didn't it?
It did. The film, titled The Trapp Family, came out in 1956, and it was a major post-war success all across West Germany, Europe, and South America. They used traditional Austrian folk songs and focused heavily on these post-war recovery themes. The success was so great, they immediately produced a sequel, The Trapp Family in America, in 1958.
And that's a crucial detail, because this existing, widely successful German version would later influence how Austrians received the American remake.
It absolutely would.
So we have the story establishing itself successfully in Europe in this specific non-Rodgers and Hammerstein format. How did the property jump across the Atlantic and transform its value so completely?
Well, Paramount Pictures initially bought the U.S. film rights in the mid-1950s. They were considering some major stars. There were even discussions about Audrey Hepburn taking the role of Maria.
Oh, wow.
But Paramount eventually let the option lapse. The story found new life when it was proposed as a stage musical, and it was designed specifically as a vehicle for the celebrated Broadway actress Mary Martin.
And the decision to hire Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II, which really unlocked the story's universal appeal, That was almost an accident.
It truly was a stroke of historical luck. The producers initially only wanted Rodgers and Hammerstein to contribute one song to the stage musical. Just one. But the duo immediately recognized that trying to integrate their complex, developed style with the traditional Austrian folk songs that the German films had used, well, it would create a jarring, inconsistent score.
So they made a counteroffer.
They did. An ultimatum, really, though a very desirable one. They said they would write a completely new, original, unified score for the entire production.
And the producers agreed. They even agreed to wait for them to finish their current project, Flower Drum Song, before starting. That wait paid off exponentially.
It really did. It provided the entire world with an unparalleled catalog of musical standards. The stage musical opened on Broadway in November 1959.
It was a huge hit.
An immense hit. It ran for 1,443 performances and swept the Tony Awards, winning 6, including Best Musical. This phenomenal success is what truly skyrocketed the intellectual property value.
So that's when Hollywood comes calling again.
20th Century Fox. They recognized the massive potential and purchased the film rights to the stage musical in June 1960. They paid a staggering $1.25 million against 10% of the gross receipts.
To put that in perspective, that's a leap from a $9,000 purchase in 1956 to a $1.25 million purchase just 4 years later.
It's an incredible appreciation in value.
And that $1.25 million is equivalent to roughly $13.3 million in today's currency. It was one of the most expensive rights deals of its time.
And that price tag was justified. Fox wasn't just buying a story, they were buying a proven hit score with massive international appeal. The transformation was complete. The localized European story had become a globally marketable musical phenomenon.
So now the property is in Hollywood, but it's still a stage play.
Right. And what's fascinating here is analyzing the tremendous creative effort that went into translating this stationary enclosed stage play into a globally memorable cinematic experience.
It's a huge jump.
A huge jump. It required transforming the characters and really utilizing the vast, breathtaking Austrian landscape, moving the narrative away from the restrictive environment of a Broadway theater.
Okay, let's talk about the architects of that transformation. Screenwriter Ernest Lehman was hired in 1962. He was famous for his adaptation of West Side Story. We know he rearranged the songs, but what was his key philosophical goal when adapting the script?
Lehman recognized that the stage play, even though it was a massive hit, relied too heavily on dialogue and static scenes. His goal, which he shared with director Robert Wise, was to open up the story.
Meaning what exactly?
It meant emphasizing action, mood, and, critically, utilizing the spectacular real-life locations of Salzburg and the Austrian Alps.
Yeah.
He needed to find visual ways to communicate the emotional shifts.
And his most successful creative move, you could argue, fundamentally changed the most famous song in the entire production to Remi.
Exactly. On stage, Do a Remi was essentially a lesson delivered indoors. Lehman transformed it into a lively, continuous montage shot across numerous beautiful locations throughout Salzburg. The Mirabelle Gardens, the famous horse fountain, the streets of the old town.
That transformation was genius.
It was, because it visually achieved 3 things at once. It justified the enormous budget for location shooting, it served as a dazzling tourism commercial for Salzburg, and most importantly, it visually chronicled the bonding of Maria and the children over an entire day. You see their relationship developing organically.
He also recognized that some of the stage material simply wouldn't work on film, especially the songs that sort of slowed down the romantic progression.
He was ruthless in serving the central fairy tale narrative. He eliminated 2 original songs from the stage musical, How Can Love Survive? And No Way to Stop It.
And those were sung by the supporting characters.
Right, by Baroness Elsa Schrader and Max Detweiler. They largely provided cynical commentary on marriage and love. Removing them ensured the film maintained a consistent tone of idealized romance. It just streamlined everything.
Now, the search for a director was almost as dramatic as the scriptwriting process. Director William Wyler initially agreed to direct, but he did so reluctantly. He confessed he actively disliked the musical after seeing it on stage.
Wyler dropped out to direct The Collector, which paved the way for Robert Wise, who was available when his film The Sand Pebbles got postponed. Wise joined in October 1963, and he immediately resonated with Lehman's vision. Wise was focused on stripping away the inherent sweetness of the stage show, centering the film on the strength of the music and the visual grandeur.
And Wise even requested new music to help smooth that cinematic transition, didn't he?
That's right. He needed musical moments that reflected the new dramatic structure. Richard Rodgers, working alone since Oscar Hammerstein II had passed away in 1960, he composed 2 new songs specifically for the film.
Something good, and I have confidence.
Exactly. Something Good replaced the stage song, An Ordinary Couple, to serve as more poignant confession of new love. And I Have Confidence was a necessary driving anthem for Maria's nervous arrival at the villa. These new songs just showed the film's constant push for refinement and cinematic vitality.
And then there was the casting, particularly of the lead, which was a collaborative refinement that ultimately secured the film's iconic status.
Julie Andrews, fresh off filming Mary Poppins, was the first choice of both Lehman and Wise for Maria. Wise was so confident that he secured her after seeing unreleased footage of her performance in Mary Poppins.
But she had reservations.
She did. Andrews herself was initially skeptical. She felt the stage version was excessively sentimental. It took Wise and Lehman detailing their vision, a more grounded, less sugary approach, to convince her. Her contract was significant for the time. $225,000 for this film and 1 additional picture for Fox.
While Maria was the consensus choice, casting Captain Von Trapp was an odyssey.
It was incredibly difficult. The list of considered actors is a who's who of mid-century leading men. Bing Crosby, Yul Brynner, Sean Connery, Richard Burton were all considered.
Wow.
Wise, however, had his heart set on Christopher Plummer, a formidable stage actor known for his gravitas.
But Plummer was famously resistant to the role.
He was. Plummer had a reputation as a classical actor and reportedly felt disdainful of the project, which he initially dismissed as The Sound of Mucus.
He really said that.
He did. Wise had to fly to London specifically to persuade him. Plummer only agreed on the condition that he could work extensively with Lehman to rework the captain's character.
So he had script approval, in a way.
You could say that. He demanded the captain be portrayed as a stronger, more forceful, complex figure with a wry sense of humor and a darker edge.
That collaboration, stemming from the actor's own resistance, it completely saved the character from being a simple romantic foil. It added the conflict and depth necessary to make his transition believable.
It's a perfect example of a difficult casting choice leading to a superior artistic result. I mean, without Plummer's insistence on complexity, the captain would have been a cardboard military figure, and the dramatic weight of the final act would have been significantly reduced.
And the casting of the 7 children was an immense undertaking in itself.
Oh, a massive undertaking. They auditioned over 200 children. It was a huge dragnet that included several famous names who were passed over, like Mia Farrow, Patty Duke, and Kurt Russell.
Even some of the Osmonds.
That's right. Most of the selected children had some professional experience, but there was one notable exception, Charmian Carr, who played Lizole. She was a 21-year-old model who was working part-time in a dentist's office. She had no prior acting ambition. It shows Wise's willingness to cast based purely on presence and suitability.
We also need to address the often misunderstood technical detail of the singing voices, specifically the dubbing that occurred.
Yes, this is a detail that always surprises audiences. Despite his magnificent voice on screen, Christopher Plummer's singing was entirely dubbed by a professional, veteran Disney playback singer named Bill Lee.
And Peggy Wood, the mother abbess.
Her singing voice was also professionally doubled.
What about the children?
The child actors did sing on the tracks, but the sources confirmed that the recordings were heavily enhanced. 4 additional professional child singers were added to most of the songs to give the group's sound a richer, fuller, more orchestrated quality. So while they weren't completely dubbed, their singing was substantially supported and layered.
Finally, the choreography was completely rebuilt from scratch.
The stage choreography was just far too rigid for the cinematic scope Wise intended. The husband and wife team of Mark Brough and D.D. Wood, who had successfully worked on Mary Poppins, were hired. They created an entirely new choreography that utilized the dynamic Salzburg locations. They were responsible for the memorable, newly added puppet dance sequence for The Lonely Goatherd, which was designed specifically for the camera.
Here's where we move from creative decisions to the immense logistical challenge of bringing this vision to life. The scale of this production required seamlessly blending these magnificent real European locations with complex Hollywood studio work.
And the entire endeavor was, well, it was fraught with real-life drama and technical complexity.
So principal photography began on the Fox lots in Los Angeles in March 1964.
Right. Interior scenes that required controlled environments, like Maria's bedroom in the Abbey, the cloister, those were shot in the studio. Huh. But the heart of the film, the grand scale, the music, the landscape, that required the crew to shift the entire operation to Salzburg in April.
And the location scouting was meticulous, seeking out those now iconic, recognizable spots.
Absolutely. The crew utilized the city's most famous landmarks. The stunning Mondsee Abbey was used for the wedding, the Felsenreich Theater for the singing competition, Nonnberg Abbey for the initial scenes in Maria, and of course the gorgeous Mirabelle Palace Gardens.
But the shooting wasn't without friction, especially regarding the sensitive political history the film touched upon.
Director Robert Wise faced immediate and pointed opposition from Salzburg city leaders. They were highly sensitive about the depiction of the Nazi takeover. And they initially refused to grant permission for the production to stage scenes featuring swastika banners within the city limits. This shows a real attempt by the post-war city to control its image.
How did Wise manage to overcome that political obstacle?
Wise navigated the opposition by using leverage. He threatened to abandon the location and use old, publicly available newsreel footage that already featured the swastikas over Salzburg instead.
He called their bluff.
He did. Faced with the choice of cooperating with a controlled depiction or having unauthorized, potentially less flattering historical footage used, the city leaders relented.
And even without the political drama, the natural environment presented enormous challenges.
Rain. It was a constant, almost paralyzing issue throughout the location filming in Salzburg. The crew was forced to work around this by constantly shifting their schedule, moving quickly to shoot interior scenes whenever the mountain weather turned against them.
I find the breakdown of the Trapp Villa particularly fascinating. It is such a central setting for the film, yet it was a total illusion pieced together across 3 separate properties.
It's a classic piece of complex Hollywood filmmaking. No single building could serve all the narrative needs. The front and back facades of the villa were filmed at Frauenberg Palace. The crucial lakeside terrace and the gardens where the kids fall on the boat, that was actually a set built adjacent to Schloss Leopoldskron.
And all the interiors.
All constructed sets back at the Fox Studios in Los Angeles. The grand dining room, the ballroom, all of it. This allowed for maximum control over lighting and camera movements.
Let's discuss the technical specifications for a moment. The film used Todd AO and 70mm 6-track stereo sound. For those who may not know, why were those technical choices so vital to the film's success?
This is a crucial detail for understanding the mid-60s cinematic landscape. Todd AO was a widescreen 70mm process, renowned for its incredible image clarity, far superior to standard 35mm film.
So it looks spectacular.
Spectacular. And when you couple that with the 6-track stereo sound, meaning distinct audio channels surrounding the audience, it created an immersive, epic experience. This wasn't just a movie, it was an event. The technology was perfectly matched to the visual and musical ambition of the film.
The opening sequence, Maria singing on her perfect mountain, is one of the most famous shots in history. Where was that magical location found?
That sequence was filmed at Melweg Mountain near Markschellenberg in Bavaria, Germany, just across the border from Salzburg.
So not even in Austria.
Not even in Austria, and it's another example of the meticulous staging. The crew actually had to physically add and later remove birch trees from the landscape to achieve the exact look and composition that Wise wanted.
And when it came to the final dramatic escape, they filmed close to a deeply historically significant and unsettling location.
They did. The final escape scene was filmed on the Obersalzberg in the Bavarian Alps. This location is heavy with history, as it was within direct sight of Hitler's famous mountain retreat, the Kielsteinhaus, also known as the Eagle's Nest. That proximity really heightened the real historical stakes, even though the cinematic escape itself was fictional.
Speaking of stakes, the production was not without real physical danger. The anecdote about the boat capsizing scene is terrifying.
It was a very near disaster.
Yeah.
Kim Carath, who played the youngest child, Gretel, was famously unable to swim. During the filming of the scene where the boat overturns on the lake, she nearly drowned.
Oh, no.
She swallowed a significant amount of water and had to be pulled to safety and rescued by her co-star, Heather Menzies, who played Louisa. It was a moment of genuine panic on the set.
The entire 5-month filming process concluded in September 1964. And as a final note on logistics, the enduring fame at the locations required the city of Salzburg to make concessions, particularly regarding the famous gazebo.
After filming concluded, 20th Century Fox left the original gazebo at Schloss Leopoldskron as a gift. However, the film's instant and massive popularity led to fans constantly trespassing to see it.
I can imagine.
Eventually, the city was forced to move the gazebo to its current, publicly accessible location at Hellbrunn Palace Park, purely as a measure to manage the overwhelming tourist interest.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, The commercial success of The Sound of Music wasn't just large, it was strategic.
It absolutely was. However, what is equally fascinating is that this massive popular success ran directly counter to the highly critical reception it received from the cultural elite, revealing a significant fault line in mid-1960s taste.
Let's start with that strategy. The studio initially planned what was called a roadshow theatrical release. For those unfamiliar with the term, what did that entail?
The roadshow strategy was reserved for what Hollywood considered its prestige epics. It wasn't a standard continuous screening. It involved reserved seating, usually higher ticket prices, and, critically, a mandatory intermission.
So it was an event?
It was an event, and it was initially released only in select cities, equipped to handle the 70mm projection and 6-track stereo sound. This signaled quality and exclusivity, which enhanced its status as a must-see.
And the strategy was immediately validated by the numbers.
The returns were immediate and spectacular. Within 4 weeks, it was the top film in the U.S. It held the #1 box office position for 30 out of the next 43 weeks in 1965.
30 weeks at #1.
And the film's initial theatrical release in the U.S. was unprecedented, lasting 4.5 years. The longest initial run for a film in U.S. history at that time.
When you adjust for inflation, the total worldwide gross of over $286 million makes it equivalent to nearly $2.36 billion in modern prices. It's firmly among the top 10 highest-grossing films of all time.
But the metrics of repeat business are what truly illustrate its domestic domination. The sources provide remarkable local anecdotes. Take Salt Lake City, Utah as a perfect example. The population at the time was roughly 199,000 people.
Yeah.
Yet over the course of 40 weeks, the film sold 309,000 tickets.
Wait, the number of tickets sold in that city exceeded the population by over 100,000? That's staggering.
It means people were seeing the film 2, 3, 4, or even more times. This level of saturation suggests a profound and deeply personal connection the audience felt to the material.
So, on one hand, we have this profound audience connection and commercial juggernaut. On the other, we have a critical establishment that seemed absolutely aghast at its success. Let's get into that critical divide.
The reaction from elite critics, particularly on the East Coast, was often venomous. They viewed the film as fundamentally anti-modern and overly saccharine. Bosley Crowther, the highly influential critic of the New York Times, dismissed the film's core as romantic nonsense and sentiment.
And the most notorious negative review was published by Pauline Kael, which led to a minor cultural skirmish.
Kael's review, published in McCall's magazine, is the defining example of the critical backlash. She famously dismissed the film as the sugar-coated lie people seem to want to eat, going so far as to suggest that the popular audience had turned into emotional and aesthetic imbeciles.
That kind of rhetoric suggests a massive cultural class war was being waged over this film, a conflict between high art and popular sentimentality.
It absolutely does. Kael's review was so dismissive of the public taste that it generated a storm of negative reader response directed at her, ultimately contributing to her dismissal from the magazine.
And the defenders of the film included the composer himself.
Yes, Richard Rodgers publicly and staunchly defended the film. He argued there was no valid reason for hiding honest emotion. His viewpoint resonated much more with the trade publications and local papers, which overwhelmingly praised the film as 3 hours of visual and vocal brilliance.
And regardless of the critical debate, the soundtrack proved to be a separate commercial force entirely.
The soundtrack album sold over 20 million copies worldwide. Its chart performance was astonishing. It reached #1 on the Billboard 200 and held a spot in the top 10 for an incredible 109 consecutive weeks.
109 weeks, that's over 2 years.
It is. In the UK, it accomplished the nearly impossible feat of being the best-selling album in 3 separate years, 1965, 1966, and 1968. This multi-year endurance proved the music transcended temporary film hype. The score became a permanent fixture in the culture.
So what does this all mean? We have a beloved film that succeeded by embracing sentimentality and theatricality, but the sources make it clear that the narrative is largely a constructed fairy tale. The film took extraordinary artistic liberties.
Did.
Let's look at the historical record, which often surprises those who only know the movie.
Understanding the differences between the 1965 film and the real history is central to appreciating the filmmaker's conscious artistic choices. The Hollywood goal was to simplify complex history into clean, emotionally resonant tropes.
Let's begin with the romance itself, which is perhaps the most heavily fictionalized aspect.
The timeline is drastically compressed. Rhea Kuchera and Georg von Trapp married in 1927, not 1938, as the film suggests. This means that by the time of the Anschluss, they had been married for over a decade and had already welcomed 2 of their 3 biological children together.
So the wedding didn't happen right before the escape.
Not at all. The film needed that to create the dramatic, Cinderella-like rush to a happy ending.
And the emotional dynamics of that marriage were also fundamentally different from the passionate on-screen conversion.
They were. The sources show the marriage was driven far more by practical necessity. Maria was upfront about this in her memoir. Jorgen needed a mother figure for his children, and Maria needed the stability of a home after leaving the abbey.
And she wrote about this.
Yes, a very revealing quote. She wrote, "I really and truly was not in love. I liked him but didn't love him. However, I loved the children, so in a way I really married the children." She emphasized that she only came to love him deeply, much later in their marriage.
The very nature of Maria's initial employment was also changed for simplicity.
The film makes her the governess for all 7 children. In reality, she was hired solely as a tutor for one child, Maria Franziska, who was named Louisa in the film, because she was recovering from scarlet fever.
And what about the captain? The Captain von Trapp, we know, is famously cold, militaristic, and humorless. Was Georg truly that rigid?
That depiction is a profound and deliberate Hollywood exaggeration. In reality, Georg was not the cold, whistle-blowing tyrant depicted on screen. His own children described him as a doting, hands-on parent. He played the violin and often spent time crafting handmade gifts for them.
So the filmmakers just needed that contrast.
Exactly, an initial obstacle for Maria's free spirit to overcome.
Conversely, the real Maria herself was perhaps a bit too spicy for Hollywood's polished version.
She was far more complex. The cinematic Maria, played by Julie Andrews, is sanitized. Her stepdaughter described the real Maria Augusta Kuchera as moody and prone to significant sudden outbursts of rage. Her temper was legendary. However, the stepdaughter also noted that these outbursts were viewed by the family like a thunderstorm that would pass, because the next minute, she could be very nice. The filmmakers clearly chose to focus only on the nice part.
Moving back to the historical context, the film simplifies the family's financial situation, depicting them as untouchably wealthy right up until the Anschluss.
That's another key divergence. The von Trapp family lost the majority of its wealth not because of the Nazis, but much earlier, during the worldwide depression of the early 1930s.
I see.
An Austrian bank where they held their funds folded. They were financially ruined. This forced them to dismiss their servants and start taking in boarders, which ultimately led to their professional singing career.
And they sang out of necessity,
which initially caused the proud naval captain great embarrassment.
This context lends enormous weight to the political pressure Georg faced from the Nazi regime in 1938. His financial desperation, coupled with his patriotic duty, must have made the German offers agonizing.
It creates an intense moral and financial dilemma. Georg was a genuine war hero. He was a Korvettenkapitan and arguably the most successful Austro-Hungarian submarine commander of World War I. He was fiercely anti-Nazi.
And the Nazis wanted him.
The new Nazi regime was expanding the German U-boat fleet, so Georg was offered a lucrative position in the German Kriegsmarine. The sources confirm he seriously considered it because his family was in desperate financial straits.
It's an awful position to be in.
It is. A proud patriot grappling with starvation or serving a regime he despised. He ultimately decided, on moral grounds, that he could not serve the Nazi regime.
This brings us to the most iconic scene of the film, the dramatic escape over the Alps, hiking toward Switzerland. The sources confirm this is the biggest geographical lie of the entire production.
It is entirely fictional and physically impossible. Salzburg is located over 200 miles from the Swiss border. Escaping by foot over those high exposed peaks would have been a catastrophic journey.
So what was the far less cinematic but factually accurate escape route?
The truth is, they simply walked to the local train station. They boarded a train, not in secret, but openly. They were able to travel because Georg was born in Zadar, Dalmatia, which had been annexed by Italy after World War I. This entitled the entire family to Italian citizenship.
So they just used their Italian passports.
Exactly. They crossed the border legally and traveled first to Italy, then to Switzerland, France, and finally London, before emigrating to the United States. The climb over the mountains just provided a much better, more romanticized, dramatic conclusion.
And finally, the character Max Detweiler, the somewhat scheming music director, also had a basis in reality, though again dramatically altered for the screen.
Max is loosely based on Reverend Franz Wasner, a secular clergyman who served as the family chaplain and their official musical director for over 2 decades. He was the one who helped them organize their music and accompanied them when they left Austria. The scheming, theatrical aspects were purely for dramatic conflict crafted by the screenwriters.
Here's where it gets really interesting as we examine the ultimate contradiction. How a film that was built on fictionalized romance and dominated the global box office for years was almost completely rejected by the very place where it was set.
That Austrian disconnect is a profound note in the film's history.
Why do the Austrian and German audiences ignore or actively dislike a film set in their own backyard?
Well, the film was largely ignored in Austria upon release.
Yeah.
It ran for only 3 days in Salzburg movie theaters before being pulled. The locals simply didn't find it authentic.
What didn't they like?
They were critical of the costumes, which they felt did not reflect traditional Austrian style, and they felt betrayed that the traditional Austrian folk songs used in the German films had been entirely replaced by Broadway show tunes.
They had already adopted the two German films, The Trapp Family and its sequel, as the authoritative version of the story.
Precisely. The loyalty to the 1956 German-language version was strong. Furthermore, the German and Austrian markets were sensitive to the extensive Nazi theme in the final act of the American version.
Which led to that dramatic incident with the film being cut.
Right. The Munich branch manager for 20th Century Fox, acting without authorization, cut the entire third act of the film, all the scenes following the wedding that depicted Salzburg under the Anschluss. Robert Wise and the studio had to intervene, restore the original film, and ultimately fire the manager.
Despite this intense local apathy and even hostility, the sheer global force of the film single-handedly transformed Salzburg into a major international tourism destination.
It created a tourist economy that the city simply could not ignore, regardless of local sentiment. American Express created the first guided sound of music tour in Salzburg in 1966, the year after the release.
And it's still going strong.
Today, the leading tour company, Panorama Tours, estimates they take roughly 50,000 tourists to film locations annually.
The sources show that by 2007, the volume of Sound of Music visitors had finally overwhelmed Salzburg's own self-conception as the birthplace of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
It's an incredible cultural irony. The film was drawing over 300,000 visitors a year, specifically because of the movie. The myth created by Hollywood had become so powerful that it surpassed the appeal of the city's preferred historical cultural icon, Mozart.
The film's cultural endurance isn't just about physical tourism, it's about its staying power in popular culture and the way audiences interact with it decades later.
And the most powerful testament to its modern interactive legacy is the global phenomenon of the sing-along Sound of Music screenings. These screenings began somewhat niche at the London Lesbian and Gay Film Festival in 1999 and just exploded into an international hit.
Where people dress up.
Exactly. Audience members participate by dressing up as characters, often as nuns or Von Trapp children, and singing along to superimposed lyrics, shouting back at the screen, and using props. This demonstrates the film's profound, lasting power to create a shared, communal, and dynamic cultural experience.
And the film remains a massive asset for broadcasters, commanding huge prices decades after its release.
The broadcast rights history speaks volumes about its sustained value. NBC paid $21.5 million in 1977 for the rights to 20 showings over 22 years. The BBC paid a record $4.1 million for the UK rights.
Looking ahead, the film is continually being treated as a high-value cinematic treasure, as evidenced by the recent restoration effort.
Yes. To commemorate the upcoming 60th anniversary in 2025, the Walt Disney Studios Film Restoration Team undertook a massive effort. They created a new 4K remaster based on rescanned 70mm negatives at an astonishing 8K resolution. This is vital because the original 70mm print contains so much detail. It ensures the visual quality and the scope of the film, as Robert Wise originally intended, can be preserved.
So, in synthesizing everything we've covered,
the story of The Sound of Music is a profound, even shocking triumph of conscious artistic license over uncomfortable historical reality. The filmmakers Wise and Lehman, they didn't ignore the history, they intentionally streamlined it. They magnified the emotional truth inherent in the music and amplified the fairy tale elements. This deliberate choice to create a pure, universally appealing fantasy was powerful enough to resonate globally, achieving unprecedented commercial success and building a lasting cultural machine, even when it was actively rejected by the historical setting it depicted.
That distinction, the deliberate choice to favor a compelling, simplified myth over complex historical documentation, is what fundamentally defines this film's legacy. It tells us something deep about what audiences worldwide crave in a shared experience.
Mm.
A final thought for you to consider. This film, more than almost any other in the 20th century, highlights the persistent tension between verifiable historical fact and compelling cultural myth. When you think about this film's enduring global appeal, consider how much of its success is tied directly to the conscious decisions made by its creators to strip away the complexities of the 1930s financial struggles and the difficult moral choices, providing a clearer, purer backdrop for the truly unforgettable music.
Well said.
Thank you for tuning in to this conversation.
Thanks for listening.